So let's begin. And we're going to begin with something which I think is very powerful. Rabbi Per discusses an amazing story that we find in the Nach, in the stories of the Torah. It's a story, we're going to begin with the story of Yoav ben Tzruya. So I don't know if everybody knows the story of Yoav ben Tzruya. It's a fascinating story. He was the general of King David. And at the time, this general of King David, they were fighting against the generals of the other kings, of other people. David's position as king in the Jewish people was fraught. It was constantly being challenged. Initially, he's challenged by Shaul, but he's also challenged by Avshalom. He's also challenged by another one of his sons. He's challenged by different enemies. So David's life is a very difficult life, and nothing can be taken for granted. His loyal general is called Yoav ben Tzruya. And in one of these wars between the Jewish people, Yoav sees that he has an opportunity to take advantage of a situation. Avner was the general for the army of Israel, and Yoav was the general for King David, who at the time was king over only the tribe of Yehudah. Okay, Benjamin as well, but either way. So what's really interesting is Yoav sees an opportunity to do something. So what does he do? He calls over Avner and he tricks the rival general. He asks him, he says, look, I have a very difficult scenario for you to talk to you about. I have a question in halacha, and if there's a way that you could kind of help me with this question in halacha, then I would really appreciate it. Avner does not discern that Yoav has an ulterior motive, so he calls him round and he says, look, Avner says, how does someone who cannot do chalitza, there used to be an idea called chalitza where they would take the shoe off of someone who they were supposed to marry, etc., without getting into the details. How does someone who has no hands perform chalitza? Do we just cancel the chalitza or not? So Avner says, no, let me show you. This is what they do. And he bent over to show him how you would remove the person's shoe using your teeth. You would pull it off. In that moment, with his rival general literally bending before him, Yoav hits him in some sort of a karate chop in the area of the fifth rib. It's a death blow, and instantly Avner, the great general, Yoav's competition, falls to the ground and he's dying. That story is very well known. That's the story that you find in the Tanakh. However, what most people do not know is the continuation of that story that's brought in the Yalkut Shimoni. And he brings as follows. Avner was such an incredibly powerful general and such an incredibly powerful warrior that even as he was struck to the ground, dying, it tells us a lot that Yoav, who was the great general of King David, was only able to fight him using some sort of devious trick. So that illustrates to you what kind of a level of power this man had. So as he falls and he's dying on the floor from this blow that's been administered to him by Yoav, he manages to reach up and he grabs Yoav in a death grip. And he's taking him down along with him. And the Midrash says that Am Yisrael came to him. The Jewish people came to Avner. And they begged Avner, Master, if you kill Yoav, then we will be left orphaned without a father. And the Pilishtim, at the time, Pilishtim, they were the enemies of the Jewish people. They were merciless. You leave us without our father, without King Yoav, without the general Yoav, right? They will plunder our wives and our belongings. They'll take our children. They'll steal our money. Please don't kill Yoav. And the Yalkut Shimoni describes that in that moment, Avner releases Yoav. He releases Yoav and he dies immediately. Now, one of the things the rabbi points out is that this is not a real conversation that's happening. Because the whole point of Yoav pulling this fast one on Avner was that he did it in a place where no one else was able to see them. So they went around a bend, behind the wall, wherever. People were not there with them. There wasn't a time for the Jewish people to come and beg, Avner to release Yoav from his death grip. What it actually means was that Avner understood in those moments when he had Yoav, round the neck, and he had just murdered him, not a friend, not a cousin, not someone he liked. He'd killed him. He'd ended his life. The world is going dark around him. He's thinking about the wife and children he's never going to see again. And in that moment, in his subconscious, he could hear the voice of the Jewish people saying what they would say if they were able to talk to him right now. He knew that the Jews would say, they would beg him, please, we know that he's done wrong, but if you leave us without yourself, you're gone as a general. Yoav is also gone as a general. There'll be no one to stop the Philistine from attacking. Please, let him live. In that moment, let him live. Right? In that moment, Yoav, even though he's dying, Avner, even though he's dying, even though he's within his rights to kill the guy who's just killed him, even though I'm sure he's filled with anger and remorse and sadness about all the things, that he's never going to be able to do because of the man that he's got, and he can just kill him. It's easy. He can hear the voice of the Jewish people. He can hear the needs of the community. He can hear. Now, think about that. If this was you, would you be able to let the guy go? Why? Because he's a good general? Because the people need him? Like, what do you mean the people need him? Let the people find somebody else. Or let that, or whatever. I can't be bothered. I can't worry about anybody else right now but me. It's me time right now. That's what you think, right? But Avner was capable. He let go and he died, and his dying thoughts in those moments were for the Jewish people, for the community that he served his entire life. Now the rabbi says, and this is a fascinating story, and I want to break in for 1 second to a conversation that my brother-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Levi, often repeats. When he was in yeshiva, so he went around the yeshiva asking all different people, like, tell me, why is it that you pray? Don't tell me what you think you're supposed to tell me. Why is it that you pray? And one person said this, another person said that. Finally, he goes to the Rosh Yeshiva himself, the rabbi leading his yeshiva. And he says, Rabbi, tell me, why is it that you pray? And the rabbi said, one day, at the end of my life, they're going to pick me up and they're going to stick me in an ambulance. And the ambulance is going to go screaming into the night, taking me to the hospital on what might be my last journey. I don't want, he says, that when I turn to God in those moments, God should say, who are you? We've never met. I don't want that to be my first prayer. I want to be well versed in prayer. I know that sometimes you get a message after a class and someone says, Rabbi, that was exactly what I needed to hear. You don't know, I don't know how you do it. I was in the middle of dealing with this problem or with that problem, and somehow after going to the class, you said exactly what I needed to hear. You talked about my exact situation. But there's some people who think, you know what? That's not my exact situation. The rabbi is talking about anger or fear or jealousy. Not my situation. That's not how I am. That's not how I'm built. I don't need that class. Lots of people go to classes that they think that they need. But one of the difficult truths of life is that if the first time you're praying is in the back of that ambulance, you don't know how to pray. In that moment, when the lights are beeping and the monitors are flashing and people are running around screaming, all you can think of is, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, please don't let me die. You can't get your head into the space of tefillah, of prayer. You can't. When a surgeon who's been doing surgery his whole life, all of a sudden his arm gets sliced open, he's done something 1,000 times, he has the presence of mind to hold it, to do a tourniquet, to do what he needs to do, because he's done it so many times before. So the irony is that actually, logically, it's much more helpful to go to classes you don't think you need. If you think you need it, that means that you're in the thick of it. And if you're in the thick of it, you probably actually are going to be unable to use the wisdom and the knowledge that's being given to you because you're in the thick of it. Avner was someone who had spent his entire life serving the Jewish community. So in his final moments, when the life is flowing out of him, and I'm sure there's a rage of 1,000 seas pumping through his veins, and he sees his adversary, and he's already got him by the neck, Avner is still capable of letting go. Why? Why could he let go? Because he was just doing what he had already done 1,000 times. And through this, Avner becomes a father to the Jewish people. I always love this idea. The expression in the Midrash, the expression in the Yalkut Shimoni is they say, what will happen if you choke out Yoav in his brain? He says, you will leave us without a father, without a guide. But Avner's name means Avner, a father who is a shining light. Avner's act is recorded for posterity to be able to communicate to us that when you do the right thing repeatedly in situations which aren't difficult, that equips you for those moments which are. And in that same moment, Avner was able to rise to an unbelievable height in the hearts and minds of Jewish people forever and ever and ever. And Yoav, who's the person who is the opportunist, actually goes down in history with not the best, highest popularity rating. So I think it's important, and I think in the conversation that we're having over here is to understand an abject need to have an element of understanding of yourself. We've communicated this idea in many different ways. One of the ways is with regards to the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. On Tu B'Shvat, we know we pray for all of the developing fruits. And the question everybody asks is, why are you praying for the fruits to grow when the sap is rising in the tree, when you can't even see it in the middle of winter? You should be praying for the fruits when they arrive. Or praying for the fruits in the beginning of the planting season, when you're first getting started. Why in the middle of the winter, when something unseen is happening underneath the bark, the rising life force of the tree is happening, that's when we pray. And I think that there's a tremendous idea and tremendous understanding here. We talk about the idea of a tree representing a human being. Like the Pasuk says, because Adam is Etz HaSadeh, a person is compared to a tree. In many different ways and many different rationales, but not for now. Either way, the concept is, when you're dealing with a tree, just as when you're dealing with a human, although you think that the time to pray and focus on it might be when all the fruits are coming, actually, in that time, you were almost powerless to deal with things. So people think that they need to educate their children and provide chinuch for their kids in key moments, in difficult moments, when there's a big bust-up, Rabbi, I don't know what to say to my kid. And you know what my answer always is? Right now, there's nothing to say to your kid. Right now, the kid is angry, the kid is hurting. Right now, there's nothing to say. What you have to have communicated is 1,000 times before, so that when it comes to that point, you can say what you need to say without any words. You can reassure the child, and you've said that to the child, or they've heard that or seen that so many times, that, the prayers are happening when the sap is rising in the tree, not in the difficult times. So if your kid is dating, as an example, and now you're trying to communicate to the child that they shouldn't run after a kid with money, right? It's a little late, because now the kid is in the throes of it. It's a difficult thing to imagine. But if your whole life you taught the kid that the most important thing isn't money, when it comes time to date, the kid might not think, oh my gosh, what do they do? What does their father do? What kind of family name do they have? Because you've drilled that in. This idea, the idea of learning Musar, actually paradoxically applies more to things that you feel are not relevant to you, because you're laying the groundwork, investing in your future for the time when you won't have time to react. Will I have set the groundwork for this moment? And even the greatest of people, and I use the word even in a funny way, because it's not even the greatest of people who recognize that they had flaws. That's why they were great, because they recognized their flaws. And I read in his book, something unbelievable. He talks about the idea. He says that Rav Yisrael Salanta used to say, when he would come in to give a speech and he would see that there was someone in the place that was standing, they stood up for him. He says, I would be sick for the entire day. Like, to think about the fact that people were showing me all this honor, it made me sick to my stomach. For the rest of the day, I felt ill. But then he continued with a smile. He says, but if I walked in and I saw one person not standing, he says, then I would be sick for a week. On the one hand, it is important. We understand this idea that we're being taught not to run after kavod. We understand these ideas. We're trying to achieve perfection. But don't fool yourself into thinking you're in a place that you're not. Where are you? Where are you regarding honor? Where are you regarding ego? I know that you're supposed to be in a certain place, but where are you actually? Be honest with yourself. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, he once walked into a shul, into a bet midrash, and everyone stood up, and he started yelling at them. He says, why are you standing up for me? Don't you know that I suffer from kavod? And the way he was talking about it was like as if he had some sort of pre-existing condition, the way you wouldn't give a diabetic, sweet things, the way you wouldn't give, you wouldn't take a person who's subject to viruses or to problems with the immune system, you wouldn't take him to a place where he could get germs. Like, what are you doing to me? Don't you know that I have this problem? To hear a great person say, I struggle with this, is a beautiful thing. But that recognition ahead of time when a person is dealing with it in the best possible way, that's something remarkable. He relates, an amazing story with the Alter. The Alter grew up, and I always talk about this idea that there was once a time when in order to study Torah, people really suffered. And I don't mean suffered because they couldn't have luxuries. I mean they didn't have food, or they didn't have heat, or they didn't have, light in their home. And the Alter's family was just like that. And one night they're sitting in the dark. They didn't have even a few pennies to light the place with some, with oil or kerosene or gasoline or whatever. They couldn't afford fuel, never mind food or luxuries. They couldn't afford light. They're sitting in the dark, and some of the kids started to cry. And the Alter said, for all the money in the world, you could never buy this moment of sitting in the dark for lack of fuel. Now, what did he mean? A couple of weeks ago, we were sitting Shabbat in my parents' home, and the phone had come off the hook. So it's sitting there, when the phone, when after you don't answer it, or whatever, on and on and on and on and on. So in the beginning, we looked to see, is there someone who's not Jewish who could shut it off? There wasn't. We looked to see, could the little children, did they realize what was going on? Could they shut it off? The kids understood. They were like, it's Shabbat, we can't. So once that was the situation, we weren't turning it off. Anyway, 20 minutes later, half hour later, it's still going. An hour later, it's still going. The whole of Shabbat, the phone is going. Someone walks in and says, that's so annoying. And I turned to them, I said, you know something? I find it so beautiful that here we are, sitting in a room, a bunch of us, in the year 2020, the phone is off the hook. All of us could go and turn it off. It's bothering, so to speak, everybody because it's, this annoying sound in a place where, but you know what? Not a single one of us has even an inkling, a thought in our heads to shut it, because the sanctity of Shabbat is worth more than the sanctity of sound. For us, it's a small price to pay to retain the beauty of Shabbat. That's a beautiful thing. When we talk about growth in Judaism, so all the time, people sometimes, they have a preconceived notion about what accomplishments look like and what success looks like. So some people think, what success is in Torah learning? Finishing Shas. What success is in prayer? For me to go through the whole Amidah and connect to each word. Someone once told me, Rabbi, I don't know what to do. Sometimes when I pray, there'll be like a moment where I forget and my brain is not focused on the prayers. I was like, sometimes you're doing better than me. The guy was being so hard on himself that he imagined that unless each and every split second of the prayer, he was 100% dialed in, that he was failing at tefillah. Now I want to point out what this means. The Alter is sitting there, they have no light and they're crying. And he says, you can't buy this. You can't buy the idea that you worked for Torah, you hustled, and you did everything you could, and you sacrificed for it, and here you are, because of your learning, you don't have even the simplest things. Isn't that beautiful? For some people, you think of success in the distance, but actually, if you go to an Olympic event, you'll realize that there's some people running, a marathon. There's some people running, 26 miles. There's some people running, a half marathon, 13 miles. But there's a completely different set of skills that are required and a completely different type of greatness which is required. Imagine you take a guy and you put 50-pound weights on each shoulder, and you put ankle weights on his ankles, and wrist weights on his wrist, and you have the guy run 100 meters. Could you imagine the 26-mile guy making fun of this guy? You only ran 100 meters. Idiot. You ran miles, yes, but you ran with no weight. I've been carrying 500 pounds on me. My short distance that I've achieved through all of this difficulty is worth the same as yours. You're not more of an athlete because you ran further without weight on you. I ran shorter, but with weight. You can't compare the two things in any way whatsoever. So a lot of times, what fuels our fake version of ourselves is a predetermined understanding of what success is. And we don't want to understand a different type of success, so we don't want to kind of recalibrate that, so we'll just lie to ourselves as to where we're holding. Yeah, I got that in check. I don't get angry anymore. I'm praying now. I'm keeping Shabbat. I'm treating my wife nicely. I'm there for my kid, etc., 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 etc. It's fine. It's fine not to be perfect. And by the way, perfection for you as measured by you today with the weights that you're on might be to walk one tiny inch. And I'm reminded of this, of this, this deadlift competition. I don't know if any of you has ever seen it, where you have these guys, monsters, enormously strong, and they put plate after plate after plate on the bar. And what is the entire thing? They take the bar, lift it up, go here, one. They don't even pick it up here. They just put it up here, and then they drop it. And everyone's going crazy. Wow, deadlifted this amount of weight. One rep. The other guy is sitting there like this, 25 reps. He's doing all of it. They're not the same thing. Sometimes a person is carrying more weight. And therefore, for them, the job of success, the job of perfection, the path to greatness is very, very, very short. And the person achieves this greatness in such a short time. So it's important to be able to allow ourselves, number one, to have a flexible understanding of what success means. It doesn't mean that you're downgrading success so that you can call yourself successful, but that you're understanding and taking into account and having that compassion for yourself when you recognize that I'm measuring myself against someone who's running with no weight. Imagine a guy who comes from a family where their father starts them off in business, and they're given $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million to start a business. And after 2 years, the person's taken a $10 million business and he's turned it into $100 million. There's another guy over there who got zero, not a cent. He started raising capital because he was selling fruit on the sidewalk, and now his business is worth, instead of 100 million, it's worth 10 million. That might well be 100 times more impressive. And if that's the case, then we can recalibrate for ourselves. What is my next step? What do I need to do? What do I need to work on? And what's my one element that I need to do without going to a difficult time, without waiting till it's, a superhuman feat of strength. Just something that Avner did 100 times, so that when the time came, I was in the right place. Speaking nicely to your wife all the time when you're not angry makes it that when you're ready to be angry, you're not going to shift out of that hard-fought, hard-won, step-by-step accomplishment and achievement, because, it's part of whom you are. Our rabbis teach us a beautiful idea. The Gemara in Baba Metzia says, Adam rotze bekav shelo, a person wants one measurement of his own, mitish'a kabin, from 9 measurements that come from somebody else. This idea, the feeling that you feel when you did something yourself, where you planted your own. We have a guy in the community, Chaim Daba. He's addicted to tomatoes that he grows in his garden. If you ever taste the tomatoes that he grows, you'll understand why. They're magnificent. Okay? Imagine I told him, I found in Walgreens, I found in Walmart, I found in, in Whole Foods, someone is making these same tomatoes. It's not the same thing that you pulled it off the thing, you waited every day, you came out, you pull it off, wow, it's amazing. That's the strength of the idea of giving those first fruits to the bikurim. So when a person has something that they made themselves, a business that they made themselves, or a masechet, something in learning that they studied themselves, not just that they heard in a class, but that they worked on to acquire, or a midah, a character trait that you had to build into your personality. You know, lots of us are born kind, but impatient. We're born patient, but not so nice. Born nice and patient, but we get angry. You know, all of the things that you were born with, those are the tish'a kabin of somebody else. But when you work through something and you see and you find that you smash through and you built something, that's why your own wife's food tastes the best. It's mine. Your own nobody's chicken soup is like your mother's because it's mine. When you fix something in the house, you want to call everyone to see it. So too, a person should also take tremendous pride in everything that they've done. You know, a little child comes in and tells you, oh, look, I walked, I talked, I wrote this, I made this picture for you. You know, a teenager wants to show you something which is a little bit more sophisticated, but they still need that recognition from others and from themselves. But an adult, we become so sophisticated in our need for recognition that we kind of drop hints. Oh, I was just passing by and I noticed, I thought that so many people are out there just waiting for that compliment or that recognition. And a big part of that is because that's how we decide where we want to go next, what we want to do, how we want to build in the future. So it's important for others to encourage others, but also to sometimes stop for yourself and think, you know what? I'm not where I want to be, but look at where I am right now. Look at this one thing that I did. Look at this one scenario, this one occurrence. There's no feeling like that in the world when you've managed to conquer something that's very, very beautiful. So the Vilna Gaon writes an unbelievable mashal. He says that the physical world that we live in, you know, it can be compared to a person who's on a raft in the ocean. He's, drifting away in the middle. His ship has gone down. He's in one of these rescue boats. The sun is beating on his head. He's incredibly thirsty. He knows that if he takes a drink from the salt water, it's not gonna, but time goes on and he sees and he's surrounded with all this water until eventually 6 hours, 10 hours, a day goes by and he realizes he's so thirsty he doesn't even care. He reaches down, pulls this cool seawater to his lips, and he takes a big drink. That first second, what happens? The cool hits his mouth. Oh, brilliant. The cool hits his throat. Brilliant. He thinks to himself, I'm such an idiot. I should have done this hours ago. But you know what happens? Seconds later, the salt gets into his system, and that salt actually dries out the moisture. Suddenly, he feels a craving to drink that was much worse than before. And it can feel it down in his stomach now, and in his, down in his throat, in his mouth. He's so parched. This person, he recognizes that you cannot slate the thirst for water with more salt, with something that actually gets rid of it. Our lives are like this as well. When we honestly recognize our triggers, whether they are ego, pride, honor, money, power, whatever it might be, everybody's got theirs, desires, whatever it might be. A lot of times we feel, I want something so bad, it's not that bad, let me just do it, I'm going to grab a little bit of this. You can't slate thirst for kavod with kavod, because actually that is a unending, it does the exact opposite. So the same way the salt water that you drink makes you more thirsty, even though you'd think, oh, what do you mean? This is what I want. The same thing was with honor. If you're chasing honor and then you say, you know what, I'm just going to go do this thing and tell everybody that I've done it. The honor actually, all it does is make you hungry for much more. The same thing with desire. The Gemara says, Ever Katan. There is one limb in a person's body. It's talking specifically over there about the limb of desire, a person's manhood, that mar'ivo savea, if he starves it, so to speak, it is full. Masbi'o, but if he's constantly, trying to fill its desire, savea, ra'ev, it actually winds up making the person even more hungry for more. And as we know that this is a reality, that in the world of desire, the more that you succumb and give into that temptation, actually, you don't solve it at all. And a drug addict who says, you know what, just one toke, just one, needle. It never ends that way. So a person needs to recognize, if I have trouble with something, what steps am I going to take to kind of undo that problem? So if, as an example, a person's drive is kavod, his drive is honor, he constantly is doing things only for the sake of notoriety. I once met someone who said to me, Rabbi, everybody thinks my dad is nice. My dad is not nice at all. My dad is only nice when people are watching. You should see what he's like when there's no cameras, when there's no applause, when they shut the doors. He's a monster. This is what the guy's telling me, Hazit, that this is what a guy's son, Hazit, should think of him. Terrible, right? So anyway, so a little while went by. I didn't see a chance to be able to interact. It's not my place to go tell someone what to do. But the father actually we wound up sitting together on a flight, a few seats away from each other. So anyway, I walked up to the guy and I saw this was my golden opportunity. We had a long flight from Israel together. So I sat down, I said, how's everything going? What's going on? Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, he starts telling me about, his family and how he's having a little bit of trouble with this one and with that one. And I said to him, listen, I don't know what to tell you. Everybody has to figure this stuff out for themselves. But I said, sometimes what's very difficult for children is when the father or the mother or the parent or the teacher, they looking at the teacher or the father, whatever it is, and they feel that they're not driven by the proper agenda. So the kid actually loses respect, and then once they lose respect, it gets very difficult for you to do your job as a parent. I said, do you think your child respects you? So right away he answers, you don't know. My kids have so much respect for me. My kids, and he was like reading the script. And I said, I said, that's amazing. It's wonderful if you have even one kid who feels that way. But you're telling me all of your children feel that way. I opened up the door for him. You see, a kavod guy, you have to open the door for him that it's okay if not all of your kids feel that way. It's great if you even have one that looks up to you that way. So suddenly he felt like, oh, you know what? I'm not a failure as a dad if one of my kids, okay. And he starts telling me about this one kid, of course, that I know already. He's had this conversation with me. So I said to him, look, if you feel that this is a problem, that this is a kid doesn't respect you, why do you think he doesn't respect you? And he said to me, this kid thinks always that there's that someone's out to get him. He's the victim type of a child. Classical, middle child syndrome, but at the same time, he's a child that always feels that everyone's out to get him. I said, okay. I said, that's, understandable. Lots of kids are built different ways. If that's how the kid is, so you gotta take the effort. If the kid tells it to you, or he's telling it to you by his actions, then, invest in divesting the kid of that thought process. Show him how much you love him and how much, you appreciate him, etc., etc. So, a lot of times you don't always know, but once you hear, then that's your chance to be able to do something. So what was amazing is, the father said to me, he goes, Rabbi, you tell me what to do, whatever it is, I'll do. Doesn't matter how much money it costs, how much effort I'm in. This is the one kid I've never been able to crack. So a minute ago, all of his kids, idolize him. Now, this is the kid that he's never been able to crack. So I said to him, look, why don't you sit and talk to him about, how you've done so much good and so much effort in the community. But you know what? That's all on a public scale. Why don't you talk to him about doing something more on the private side? Like instead of doing things out in the open, trying to find cases and say to him, look, you have lots of friends. Maybe some of your friends have any issues or they come to you. Maybe that could be something that I can help, and that could be our mitzvah that we do together. Working on something like this where the father recognized this element in himself and he was willing to try and fix it. And all of a sudden the kid comes to me. He says, you don't understand, da-da-da-da-da. And the point is, it wasn't that I had triggered that in the person. All it took was having the guy see himself, or maybe even, let's say, allowing him to see himself as not flawless, not perfect. And just the ability to see that opened up the possibility to be able to change. A lot of times people are telling themselves a lot of stories. There's a great conversation that the rabbi brings that happened with his wife. Rabbi's wife was a therapist, and she went to one of these programs, and In this professional meeting, one of the speakers got up and he said, look, it's very important that you never give anyone therapy or training for free. Even if they have no money, even if they're on food stamps, even if whatever, never give a discount. If you give them a discount, then they won't respect the process. They're not going to pay attention to what you have to say to them. The minute you're charging them $200 an hour, so now they're going to listen to what you have to say. Very important. And by the way, not for yourself, obviously. You're not doing it for you. You're doing it for the patient. And you're doing the patient a disservice if you give them a discount. Anyway, the rabbi's wife, she hears what the guy said, and she says, okay, I hear. She said, so you're telling us that we can't accept insurance? Insurance means that you're getting paid, but they're not paying it. So it's not coming out of their pocket. So it's not hurting them, right? The guy didn't know what to say. With that one question, with that one insight, instantaneously, in that split second, she'd exposed this guy who's telling you, oh yeah, you got to charge them for them. It's for them. They need skin in the game. She says, but one second, you take insurance, don't you? When you take insurance, it's not skin in the game. They're not paying for it. So if it's a case of insurance, then you can give it to them for free. You understand? So a lot of times there's these little stories that we tell ourselves, and this is why I'm doing this, and I'm doing this publicly because I want everyone else to learn from me. Really? Is that why? What happens when nobody's there? Like, does your actions, do they bear out what you're claiming? You are. So it's a fascinating thing that these little questions that sometimes we can have that. I don't want to say burst somebody's bubble because I think it's exactly the opposite. I think that that's making their bubble. The power of questions should never be underestimated. So a kid comes to you with a problem, you can guide them just with questions to realizing the answers for themselves. Powerful that. And it's not a technique and it's not a manipulation. You're actually, by challenging the easy narrative that they have, and by giving them perhaps a different way of thinking about it, just that question can change the person's whole life. I remember asking somebody once, this person came to me for advice in his field of business, where he said to me, look, this is where I am. I already know how to do this. I'm building a family now, and this is my career. This is what I'm focusing on. If this is what I'm focusing on, Rabbi, he says, should I risk the stability that I have here? Maybe I'll make less in another business, but actually, in that business, I feel like I would enjoy it more. So I asked him a very simple question. I said to him, listen, you tell me. Imagine you had all the money in the world. All the money in the world. You're just sitting there, with all the money in the world, but you're bored at home. And someone comes to you and they offer you, this job, and they offer you this job. Yeah? Which would you choose? So the guy says, well, no brainer. He doesn't even wait 1 second. He chose the other job. So I said, so you're primarily here only for the purpose of money. In other words, if you could, if it didn't make a difference, in a split second you jump ship, you'd be over there. He says, yeah. I said, so then really all we need to do is figure out how to make up the difference between what you're making here and what you're making there and get you a job there. Now, that can be achieved in a lot of different ways. And I want to give you an example of this that happened with a dear friend of mine. A friend of mine said to me, I have this great job, unbelievable job opportunity, but the teaching is to people on a much lower level. And I really enjoy teaching people on a much higher level. So, I feel like I'm not going to get sipuk. The word in Hebrew is sipuk, which means I'm not going to get a fulfillment in my job if I'm teaching people who are not religious when I gave a very complicated, shiur, talk and lecture all these years in Israel. I'm not going to have my sipuk. The job is perfect. The city is perfect. The stuff for my children is perfect. But I'm not going to have sipuk. And I said to him, who said that the sipuk has to come from your job? You want to give a very complicated shiur? No problem. Go to this perfect job for you, for your family, for your future, for everything. It's great. You love it. Excellent. You just feel like you need to be challenged more. No problem. Get a group of guys together on a Thursday night. I said, I used to do this when I was in Aish. In London, I had a chabura of guys. Thursday night, we would learn at 1 o'clock in the morning. We would learn minchat chinuch. Very difficult. But because I felt I wanted to teach something that was very tough, very difficult to understand, you needed a big background, a lot of knowledge in Gemara and etc. and Halakha to be able to study it. So if you need that sipuk, no problem. You have this all the time. People, who are very religious, they go out on a date and they say, look, I was talking to her, but I was talking and learning to her, and and she didn't quite understand me. She's diamond, she's amazing, she's wonderful, she's kind, she's giving, she's forgiving, she's the best ever. But I said to him, one of the oldest lines when it comes to shidduchim is, do you need a wife or do you need a chavruta? You don't need to study with your wife. Study with someone else. What's core to what you're trying to achieve? And that question, what is core to what you're trying to achieve, is one of the most powerful questions we could ask ourselves. The rabbi talks about a fantastic issue that comes up all the time. A lot of times when you have two brothers or a brother and sister that grew up in the same house, and then all of a sudden one of the brothers is incredibly successful and the other one is maybe mildly successful, well, not successful at all, but there's a big difference between them. Suddenly there crops up all these problems. And by the way, it's problematic for both. It's problematic for the one that's not as successful because they feel, lower down the totem pole. They feel disrespected, not by the other one, but literally by their own failures or perceived failures in life. This guy's doing so well. We grew up in the same house. We went to the same school. We had the same parents. If he's good and he's doing well, it must mean that I had brothers. Again, sometimes you have these situations where, a guy came to me to tell me, Rabbi, you need to help me with my brother. What's the problem? He says, I'm making a wedding. I said, okay, beautiful. It sounds great. He goes, and my brother came and told me he wants to pay for the wedding. I said, okay, what's the problem? He says, and I can't pay for the wedding. I said, okay. He goes, I'm still not hearing the question. And he says, this guy, my brother, he never stops. All he's ever trying to do is humiliate me. I said, he's trying to humiliate you? Are you sure? Do you have the money? He says, no. I said, do you need to make the wedding? He says, yes. I said, would you go and ask him for the money? He says, maybe. He says, it's not the fact. He goes, it's the fact that he offered. Who says? Now, when you feel that way, yes, you translate everything into those terminologies. So if you're a jealous person, you assume other people are jealous. If you're a manipulative person, you assume every situation from everybody else is manipulative. You know why? Manipulative, because that's kind of what you would do if you were in the situation. But actually, that's not the case with the brother. And I said to him, let me ask you, if you think he's trying to humiliate you, I said, does he have this relationship with any of the other brothers or sisters? He said, no. I said, well, has he offered to pay for any of the other brothers and sisters? He said, yes. I said, so why would you assume that it's because of that? You're able to disprove it yourself, just asking a few simple questions sometimes, where you use your brain instead of your heart or your instincts, allows a person to kind of get beyond that. So in situations where brothers are in different places, so you have one who's constantly feeling outdone by the other and maybe is not happy for them, and the other brother now is like, why is he not happy for me just because he's not as successful? Why can't he be happy for his own brother? We have to not talk just because I got a promotion. I feel like I can't tell him. I didn't want to invite my own brother to Chanukat Havai. He's going to come to my house and he's looking like this, and all he's thinking is, I can't believe this guy. How does he have so much? Giving me ayin hara. So sometimes you have that brother. Then the second one is always trying to tone themselves down to walk on eggshells for the other one. And then they become resentful. So in these situations between brothers where you find that they're kind of at each other's throats, not even because of anything bad, just because of the way that there's a difference between them, it's incredibly important for brothers to be able to accurately, authentically, genuinely have this conversation with one another. I feel threatened by your success. I don't know what to tell you. That's how I feel. Okay, well, what could I do to make it better? I don't want to poke your eyes out. What should I do? Would you rather I don't spend any money? Obviously, that's not going to happen. So how can I do it in a way that helps you? Is there something that I could do to help you? And I will never tell anyone about it. I'm not going to broadcast it at all the simachot. I'm not going to ask you to say thank you to me publicly. What could I do to work on this problem? It is a real problem. You are a human being and you are hurting and I hear you. Let me help you. The same way, sometimes it needs to be done the other way. Parents also, they get involved. They find a child that's doing really well and then there's another kid that's not doing as well. They start investing in the other one because they're trying to level the playing field. You are like this, so this one isn't, so we're going to give them that leg up. And then the other one's like, what do you mean? Why are you giving them $25,000? You're not giving it to me, so I have a little bit more money. I should be penalized because I was successful, a little bit more successful. But a situation like that requires the parents to sit down and have an honest conversation. Not because we love the other one more, it's that as parents, our job is to try and sustain our children. It's not our job to give everybody the same thing. It's to make sure that everyone can float. You're floating. You're going to be okay. This one, without our help, we don't think is going to be okay. What would you have us do? Ask that question. What would you like me to do? How can I make it better? Oftentimes, just that question itself is strong enough. The Gemara tells us in Shabbat, the rabbi quotes the Gemara in Shabbat, where the Gemara says that because of two silaim, the weight of two silaim in milat, in wool, where Yaakov treated Yosef in a different way, the brothers were so jealous that the entire story blew up to the point where they then went down to Egypt. So in that story, what we're learning is that the Gemara is saying that Yaakov was showering Yosef with affection, the other brothers got jealous. But really we have to ask, why was Yaakov doing that? I actually suggested this morning an idea that, the reason why he treated Yosef differently than all the other brothers is because Yosef's mother died. And yes, Binyamin's mother died too. But Binyamin was a baby. He never knew his mother. Which child of all of his children do you think suffered the most? Yosef. Yaakov is taken to task because he invests and loves and puts effort into a child who watched his mother die. How could you blame him? And the answer is you can't. But the point is that each of those children needed the Shivatim. Somehow Yaakov needed to communicate to them that it wasn't for lack of love, it wasn't for anything but the fact, maybe that was why, maybe this is why I need to do more for them. And if you don't communicate that, often those things get lost. And it would be wonderful if everyone was a malach, but we're not, we're human. And recognizing our weaknesses is the biggest and most important key for all of us to be able to advance. I'll tell you something. When a person finds that element of success and they can mark, their growth, that's something very special, And I'll give you an example for this idea. We read about Rabbi Akiva. In just a bit, we're going to talk about Rabbi Akiva on Tisha B'Av. We're going to talk about his great sacrifice. And he dies, and on his lips, as he's being tortured for being a Torah scholar, he says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Magnificent. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Okay, I got it. With you. However, how does he say that? How does he say when they're pulling his skin off his face for doing nothing but God's command? For teaching Torah, for risking his life. And that's the response. And he says, Shema Yisrael. The answer is, 1,000 times he said Shema Yisrael where he didn't need the pat on his back. And I think there's something very instructive about the idea that we say Shema Yisrael in the morning and at night. Each morning and each night. And why do we say Shema in the morning and at night? To communicate that again and again, I say Hashem is in control in the daytime, when everything is clear. I say Shema Yisrael when I'm lying on the ground and it's nighttime and I can't understand anything. But if I do that again and again and again and again and again and again, when it comes to the great challenge, the moment of my life, when I'm put on the stage and this is what I was brought in the world to do, to be able to forgive, or to be able to do something wonderful, or to do something that's going to change my destiny, the destiny of my family forever. In those great moments, I will have prepared myself by being real with myself. It's the same Rabbi Akiva who does the greatest thing ever, gives his life al Kiddush Hashem. The same Rabbi Akiva who was capable of standing, looking at a stone and saying, I don't know anything. But you know what? If the stone can be pierced by the water, maybe my heart could also be pierced by the Torah. That is such an illuminating statement to make. It's illuminating about Rabbi Akiva. It teaches us what he was capable of recognizing and saying about himself. You know what I would have said if I saw the stone, being hit by the water? I would have said instantaneously, I would have looked at the stone, seen the water, and said to myself, nice stone. But it was only Rabbi Akiva who was constantly thinking about his heart. He was thinking about the fact that I am a person who emotion, who Torah wisdom doesn't penetrate. That was on his mind. Have you ever met someone who's emotionally closed off? They're not aware that they're emotionally closed off. They're just emotionally closed off. You know when they become aware of that? They become aware of that in the most difficult moments of their life. They become aware of that when they're facing, an outpouring of emotion from someone else, and then they realize, how come I don't react that way when I see my son, my daughter? How come I didn't cry at a wedding when that person's crying? People witness that. They don't witness that when they go on a nature trail hike. And the point is that the reason why that was brought up in Rabbi Akiva's mind is because it was there all the time. He was thinking about his own heart all the time. And what a beautiful lesson that is for all of us. To be able to think and have an accurate picture of ourselves in front of us all the time. To say, you know what, all the time, in front of me, I am someone who is prone to doing things to make people happy. I love when people say nice things about me. You know what, I'll do things even, not only a sacrifice, but actually that hurt me in order to be able to get honor from someone else. Person to know that, you know what, I'm the type of person that you flash money in front of me, I make the wrong choices. I make bad choices. If I think I stand, when you're aware of that, then when money comes, what's your brain telling you? The same thought you've been saying a bunch of times. Here it comes. Stand up. Here's a wave. Brace yourself. Right? If you're thinking that way, then it's very different. I don't know. You ever see these little videos of people taking these pictures on the beach? A wedding picture or this or that, and they're unaware of this tsunami coming behind them. Invariably, the wave takes them and smashes them down and knocks, washes them out. On the other hand, if you're watching a wave come, obviously not a tsunami, there are some waves that will take you down no matter what. They're just too big. But sometimes, when you're sitting and you're watching it come and you're ready, you get a chance to plant your legs. Yeah? Your legs are your support systems. They support you. You know money's coming. Get your support system. Who's your support system? Maybe it's your wife, who's a little bit less tainted by this issue, who's not such a kavod freak like you, or maybe who's not testosterone and power driven in the same way. And you can say to her, what do you think about this? I know that I'm going to lean into this because these are the type of things that I love, but I want your opinion, your parents, your rabbi, whatever the case might be. Hashem should bless us always to be the Avners in this world, to be people that are capable of achieving and getting revenge, but letting go because we recognize that that's not what we want. May Hashem bless us all to be the very best people that we can be. See you soon. Shabbat Shalom.